they do not have to quarantine. They can be at school and work as long as they don't develop any symptoms. It's still recommended, and you'll see this in the letter that public health requires us to send. It's still recommended to test on or after day 5, just to make sure you're not developing an asymptomatic case of COVID. And that testing is available at school sites 2 days a week. The school sites offer testing. And then, of course, if that test is positive or any symptoms develop, then you would be following the instructions over there in orange, and they're also down below. So back up to that vaccinated consideration for our close contacts. If someone is not fully vaccinated, so we go over to the no, there's different instructions for students and staff. For students, we then ask if the exposure happened in our school setting or at a school event. And if so, and both people were masked, so for example, during a class, they would be masked, then there is the option of the modified quarantine. And this is when the students are able to stay at school to attend their classes and get that instruction and that learning, but have to be excluded from extracurricular activities for 5 days. And then they need to test on that 5th day in order to come out of that modified quarantine after 5 days. If the exposure happens for students outside of the school setting, so for example, they go to a party on the weekend and somebody there ends up testing positive afterwards, then it's a no. So they would be in the at-home quarantine. And again, this is for not fully vaccinated students. So not fully vaccinated and they were exposed outside of school, they have the option of a shortened quarantine. So they will be in an at-home quarantine, but if they test negative on day 5, they can go ahead and return to school. So I think those are some of the key factors here on this chart, and just know that this is what we are using. And when they're giving you instructions at the school site about what to do next, this is what that is based off of. All right. So sometimes guidance is very clear, like that flow chart, and we can just follow it through. And sometimes we have to make some decisions based on the guidance, or sometimes we get options. So this is what we're doing in some of those cases where the guidance leaves some decision making to us. So one of those examples is how we handle our contact tracing and our communication with a positive case. So we do have to notify our school personnel. That's actually something that was required by law last year, and that we're continuing, that school personnel get notified of any close contacts. We do have a district dashboard that we update weekly. That dashboard represents school-based exposures, meaning those are individuals who have been on campus during their potentially contagious period, which is defined as 48 hours before the onset of symptoms or the symptoms or positive test, whichever came first. And then one area in the guidance where things start to get a little bit not as clear is about athletes and student performers. The guidance does recommend that all students participate in regular testing, and especially athletes, because we've seen that sometimes the spread across the state can be more common with athletic activity just because of the nature of that. So in some cases, the guidance says things like masks must be worn indoors, even during heavy exertion, but then it'll say something like, to the amount tolerable for the athlete. And it says that if it needs to be removed during indoor athletic activities due to that exertion and that it not being tolerable, that they have to test at least weekly. So, you know, if you have a basketball player, they are likely being asked to test weekly. And that's also true for our performers, because the guidance does say while actively performing. So we are applying that for example, theater, during performances, but not during rehearsals. And that tracking dashboard I mentioned where we're putting those school-based exposures is linked here on this slide. It's on our website in COVID dashboard. You can just go to the site and search for it as well. So I mentioned our on-site testing. All of our sites, all of our comprehensive sites have testing 2 days a week, one time in the morning and a different day in the afternoon. Boynton has 1 day of testing midday that students can take advantage of. And Case can test with Del Mar, and Camden also has a day that they have testing. And we have both PCR and rapid antigen testing available. Sometimes the supply of one or the other is a little more limited just because we haven't gotten a shipment yet. And sometimes their supply is down. So it might depend on the supply, but you do have a choice between those two options. And the link is here where parents can pre-register for the rapid antigen test through Binax Now. If you've done it already, you don't have to do it again. It is a one-time pre-registration. For the PCR testing, sites have those because they're individual per site. So as I was mentioning on the flow chart, there are some scenarios where students are able and staff to come back early from their isolation periods. So instead of doing a full 10-day isolation, they can come back to school after 5 days. It's also true for quarantine. So we know that you need to take that negative test on day 5 in order to come back early on day 5. So what should you do if you can't find a test for your student? So if a student is in isolation because they tested positive or they have symptoms, or they're in quarantine because they are an unvaccinated close contact, they shouldn't come to campus to get their testing because they're supposed to be isolating or quarantining. So in those cases where a student needs a negative test to return to school, we can provide one at-home test kit per student. We got a limited shipment of those to provide in these cases. So a family member who is not in isolation or quarantine and has no symptoms should come to the district office and pick that up. And I'm just going to reiterate, same with the site testing. Please don't come to the district office if you're not feeling well or are in isolation or quarantine, because then that's exposing other people. Please send a different household member or friend to pick that up. When you do come to pick it up, we're going to ask you some questions to make sure of the situation, because these tests are reserved just for students who aren't able to come to school and need that negative test to return to school. And then we have a at-home test result form that you can submit to your school's site. If you go to that link down there, it's going to show you all the different links for the school sites. You're going to click on the right one, and it's a form to fill out. And then you upload a picture of the test according to the directions on that page. One of the most important mitigation strategies that just keeps getting called out time and time again in the guidance and in messages that we get from public health is about mask wearing. And we've seen even more emphasis lately on the importance of using a surgical mask or better. And so to that end, we are requiring that our staff wear a surgical mask or better, and we are recommending for students the same thing. Remember that masks are required at all times indoors and can be worn outdoors and recommended as well, especially walking through those crowded hallways. There's a lot of people around. Outdoors is much less of a risk, but still can wear that mask as well. And then if there's any concerns about staff or students not wearing masks appropriately, we do ask that you contact your school site and let them know. The teams at the sites really are trying to make sure that that's happening. And so if you have information to help them, that would be the place to let them know. We do have information about some of our other mitigation strategies up on our website, including our cleaning procedures and our ventilation measures that all meet or exceed the requirements and recommendations in our guidance. And then of course, we know when students are out of school, they are missing assignments and things like that while they're at home. And so we just wanted to remind you all that students do continue to have access to assignments via Canvas. If they are feeling well enough to access those and work on them while they're out, they are definitely welcome to do so. And students who are subject to isolation or quarantine, based on this flowchart and this decision tree that we use, and are being required to stay home, will be excused for their absences. And as you know, excused absences mean that they're able to make up work that they miss. And so their teachers will work with them on that. All right, I am going to turn it over to Meredyth Hudson.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Meredyth, and I'll talk just a little bit about the staffing implications that we've seen so far. Now, I know the news is filled with stories of districts struggling, and we have our beginning of the semester has not been without its struggles, but we are right now we are faring relatively well, and I'll give you a couple of data points first. If you'll just click those bullets for me. So in terms of our staff absences, we saw 15% of our staff out that first week back after the break. And we are now, you can keep clicking for me, now just a little more than 9% of our staff are absent. And a normal absence rate for a school district is about 8%, maybe a little bit less. So we are hoping that we continue down in that towards that path, towards more typical absence rates. We are seeing absences still spread out among both teachers and our support staff. And on the instructional side or the teaching side, we are calling up a variety of folks to serve as substitutes when a teacher is out, in addition to our substitute pool. We have site administrators, counselors, activity directors, our district office administrators serving as substitutes. And I neglected to mention, though, teachers at the school site are also pitching in when one of their colleagues is out. They will often substitute during their preparation period. And we are working to build that team more. We've got each of our school sites have what we call roving substitutes already assigned to them. That's been happening really this whole school year, and we've worked to try to increase that group of roving substitutes before the winter break to be prepared for more absences in January when we returned. And we're building that pool of substitutes now. So if anyone on this call, or if you know of anyone who might be interested, we are always looking for folks to join the team. We have received some really good news recently where there is more flexibility around becoming a substitute in terms of the requirements there, and more flexibility around allowing a substitute to remain in a class for a longer period of time. So we have a careers page on our website that you can very easily navigate to, and we are hosting some information sessions next week for parents and community members who are interested in becoming part of the effort and joining our district so that we can keep that learning environment in place for our students. And I will also touch on vaccine requirements. And again, I come from primarily the staff side, but I'll touch on students too. So we've seen some questions around requirements for vaccine. So our state does have a health order that requires all school district staff to be either currently vaccinated or fully vaccinated, or for them to participate in required COVID testing twice a week. And that is in place. We have our vaccination rate is about 97%, hovers around 96, 97%. And we then have a group of employees who test regularly. We are in the process now, though, of gathering booster data for all of our staff. We did get some questions too around, will there be a student vaccine requirement? And again, our state does have, has issued some guidance, our governor issued guidance around implementing vaccine requirements for staff and students in the future once the vaccines are fully approved for the age group. So we will be waiting on when that becomes, when that's in place for us. But as of right now, staff is required or testing, and then we'll wait for that additional guidance on whether or not a vaccine will be required for students soon. But until then, we definitely encourage full vaccine, booster, on the vaccine website that is linked here or identified here, sccfreevax.org. I think you can also find places where there are drop-in clinics where there is not necessarily an appointment needed too. And that's it from the staff side.
I think that this part's me. I said, give as many of the questions as you possibly can to Meredyth, Crystal, but okay, I'll answer some questions. So, but this is really about to address a few questions that I received more more last week than this week, I'll be honest, but around this question of, are we going to go back to distance learning, or why haven't we already gone back to distance learning? Not a lot, but a few people asked that question right after Christmas break. And the answer to it is that we really are trying to do everything we can as a state to try and keep the in-person learning going right now. And districts do not have the authority to shift to virtual learning on their own accord. If they're going to do so, right now the law says they need to do so first by contacting their county office of education and the California Department of Education, really to talk that through with them and see if there's any way it can be avoided. So for some of you who maybe have been following news in the media, for example, one of the districts in our county, Milpitas, they had announced last week they were going to go virtual this week, but with the intervention of the county department, the county office of education, they ended up reversing on that, staying open this week. So that's really the big push that those authorities are making, but it's baked into the law. The law that allowed us to do virtual learning by default is no longer available to us. Now, I think that's the right thing, in the sense that we should do everything we can to stay committed to in-person learning, because we do know that the outcomes for students have been better when we are in person. And from what a lot of the medical authorities are saying and scientific authorities are saying, is that now 2 years into the pandemic, looking at the data from the past, that school closures don't really seem to change transmission rates in a given community. So what I mean is, when you have COVID being transmitted in a given community, shutting schools usually has no effect on either bringing that rate down or up, because schools just are not primary areas of transmission. There's plenty of other places out there, restaurants, bars, gymnasiums, other places that people go, that those are going to be the places where COVID is most likely to be transmitted, not in school. So that is going to be the push, definitely, to keep schools open as long as possible. And I feel very fortunate that we live where we do have so many, not only do we have staff vaccinated, but so many of our students vaccinated as well. And Sergio, I think you're riding the slides. Go ahead and just put everything on for this slide on here. Don't wait for me. So as Meredyth was talking about, the decision by the governor to issue his executive order to give us greater flexibility to respond to staff shortages, that's just another signal of how important it is for us in this state that we keep the schools open as much as we possibly can. Now, for those parents who maybe feel, well, you know, I'm still getting uncomfortable, we do have our virtual learning academy as an option, and you can find it on our webpage. But that is in more of the remote independent study option. If that's where a certain family feels that that's the best choice, that option does still exist. So are there any conditions under which we might return to distance learning en masse? You know, things change, and we've seen that, you know, multiple times over the last 2 years. So I can't tell you that there aren't circumstances under which we might have to pivot and go back to distance learning, but I can tell you in the immediate term, we're going to do everything that we can not to do that. And as also was shared earlier in the presentation, directly after the winter break, we were at double-digit absences on the part of students and staff. But as of today, we're below double digits. So, you know, knock on wood, we might already be seeing the surge coming, the end of this particular surge. And now I think Sergio is going to just open it up to just more questions from folks about anything that we may not have addressed through the presentation. I just want to remind folks who's on the call with me. I'm Bob Bravo, the superintendent. And right before me, you heard from Ms. Meredyth Hudson. She is the Chief of Human Capital and Strategy for the district. And at the top of the hour, we heard from Crystal Adams. And Crystal Adams is our Director of Student Services, but she is also the person that serves as our chief liaison with the county authorities. And so she's constantly being briefed on what's new in terms of COVID guidance. And we also have with us on the call, he hasn't spoken as part of the slides, but we also have with us Assistant Superintendent Cerda, who is the Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services.
There's a question in the chat that relates very much to our educational services and related to the independent study option. Can a student move from independent study or to independent study during the wave and then move back when the wave is over, if it takes a few weeks? What is that process? Can that happen?
Well, yes, you can. And like Dr. Bravo mentioned, AB 130, we are compliant with that law. We do have the Virtual Learning Academy. There is an application. The link is log on to cuhst.org, click on schools, and you'll see the Virtual Academy. And so if you do apply, you will have to sign a master agreement. You will be contacted by Liz Tovar, who's the principal / she's also the administrator that oversees it, or the counselor, Aaron Reyes, who will answer any other questions and what the expectations are for your student. And so parents do have to opt in. And if there is no progress, we're hoping that the students continue with the academy. We don't want students to just try to, parents enroll them for a couple of days and then they want to go back. We really want to give students the opportunity for continuity of instruction. And so we're hoping that you do keep the students in there for the time that they do need to continue with their studies. And it is all virtual, by the way.
Great. The next question I have here is related to our school activities and extracurriculars. So Crystal, I think you would be a great person to answer this one. Are events in school theaters allowed for full capacity with outside guests? What's the process for that in theater event indoors?
Yeah, I'll answer it for theater, but I'll kind of in general too. So the K-12 guidance and the California Beyond the Blueprint documents, which are what the California Department of Public Health have put out for us to base these decisions on, does not limit capacity indoors or outdoors for any activity. So there is not a requirement to, in the past, we remember things like you can operate, but only at 30% capacity. So there's no requirement to limit capacity. However, local site principals or theater teachers might make the decision to be a little bit more careful. I know in the fall, I definitely went to some plays and things at schools and saw that maybe they were keeping one seat open between guests or things like that, but that is above and beyond the recommendations at this time. And so they are able to be more restrictive if they choose to out of extra precaution, but there's no need to limit capacity except what the fire marshal would say.
That's great. Thank you, Crystal, for that. I think this one is related around mask use and procurement of masks. Dr. Bravo, I think you've been the one that really has been leading the direction on purchasing masks for students and making sure that there's adequate PPE for our staff. What's the possibility of good masks being procured by the district for kids and teachers? That's the question that we got from someone today. Oh, sorry, I think you might be on mute.
Gosh darn it, I hate that. When you put yourself on mute and then you start talking. So I think first the question would be defining what a good mask is, right? So to answer the question, if we're talking about your surgical type mask, 3 plies, non-woven fabric, we have those right now. for staff and students. So we're in the place where if a student comes to school and they don't have a surgical mask or better, we can give them a surgical mask. In terms of masks, even above that quality of the surgical mask, we do have some KN95s and some N95s that I think we either received this afternoon or will be receiving tomorrow. So that is definitely something that we have every interest in pursuing. But again, in terms of surgical, in terms of like your student tomorrow, if your student goes to school tomorrow and they ask for a surgical mask, they should get one.
All right, so I think coming back to the question of events, we talked a little bit about indoor events, I'm sorry, but there is a question now about outdoor events and student dances, which, you know, some parents might see them as a little bit different. Crystal, this would be a good one for you. What's the basic guidance specifically for the upcoming winter balls with this serious Omicron situation? And is that different from what you shared earlier?
Yeah, I see there's a couple of questions. I'll try to hit the high points that might address the related questions. So all school events, whether on campus or off, have to follow the CDPH K-12 guidance. And so masks are required indoors, and there are no capacity limitations, and there are no requirements for any kind of physical distancing and things like that. It's the same at school as it is at the event. Winter balls, by and large, are indoors. Sometimes they are offsite, sometimes they are on-site. Regardless, they must follow the same guidelines for mask wearing. In addition, there is guidance in that Beyond the Blueprint document that I mentioned about what they call mega events. And depending on the size of your child's school, their winter ball might fall into this category. So for any event that is considered a mega event, so for indoors, that means 500 people are in attendance, and for outdoors, that means 5,000. So I think we're really talking about the indoor ones for the most part here. Any indoor event with 500 or more people indoors requires proof of vaccination or a negative test to attend the event. And so, you know, one of the examples I saw on here was Lee's Winter Ball. And yes, that event usually does have over 500 people. And yes, the school has a plan in place for collecting that information prior to the event because it is required.
Now there's questions about who these tests are for that we have screening on our campuses. I think we shared earlier that students can get tested regularly on our campus. And now with the Binax now registration looking a little different, can parents also be signing up to get tested at our sites?
So the tests that are provided to us free of charge from CDPH, they're very clear that those tests are only for our staff and our students. So we are not able to offer them to anyone else. However, we are working on setting up our very own community testing site here at the district office in the parking lot through a partnership with Curative. We're still in the onboarding process, so probably 3 weeks maybe away from it actually going live. But that would be something that would be available for parents, community members, anybody to take advantage of once that opens. So unfortunately, we are not allowed to offer our tests to people besides students and staff.
So we're getting a question. I see some information about contact tracing and how parents will be notified. People are a little concerned that those notifications aren't going to the right people and wondering if the whole child's class will be informed whenever someone tests positive in that class, or who exactly is going to be notified in a close contact situation in a classroom.
Absolutely. So we are, as of, I think it was last night, I can't even, my days are blurring together now. But for the first time, there were some options provided to districts regarding how we want to handle contact tracing. And We actually met with some stakeholders and talked about the very real implications of all of those options. And we are continuing with the individual contact tracing approach. And so what that means is for every case that causes an on-campus exposure. So again, if someone tests positive and they never came to campus within the 48 hours prior to that positive test or their symptoms starting, then that case is not a school-based exposure and did not create any close contacts. So there's no investigation there. It's not related to school in any way. And we focus on the ones that are those school-based exposures. Every single one of those cases is individually investigated by our site response teams, who I have to just say are some of the most amazing people. And I hope that when you're talking with them, you're thanking them because they're working very hard during a very busy time right now. So they collect seating charts, they interview the people involved, and they identify the people who meet the definition of a close contact. Again, that is someone who would have been within 6 feet or more of the confirmed case for a total of 15 minutes in a 24-hour period. So it involves a lot of factors, finding out what does class look like? Does it look like the teacher is standing at the front and the students are away from the teacher for the entire period? Is it more mixing and interactive? And then they identify all of those close contacts. Each close contact has to get the specific instructions for their situation. As you saw on the decision tree, there are different instructions for vaccinated students versus unvaccinated students, 18-year-old students versus under 18-year-old students. And there's just a lot of different factors. So they're sifting through those letter templates from the Department of Public Health, and they are notifying all of those identified close contacts, as well as sending the staff required exposure notice. With all of that going on, as I'm sure you can imagine, there isn't a capacity to send a notice to the entire community every time that this is going on, because they're very busy trying to get the right accurate information. So that's why we have the dashboard. And I do see concern in some of our questions that have been submitted about the numbers on the dashboard. So I want to reiterate again that the numbers on the dashboard are the school exposures. It's not every single person who's enrolled at a school who is tested positive that week. It is the ones who were on campus that created an exposure for other individuals on campus or at a school event during that 48 hours before the symptoms or the test. And so, if you're hearing a lot of students are out, remember we had a break recently. So some of the positive cases are still left over from a time that they weren't coming on campus and exposing others at school. So that is updated weekly. Sometimes we hear of cases from last week on Monday of this week because someone tested on Friday after school. And when that happens the following Friday, we update those numbers as well. So each Friday is when we go in and add the numbers for the week and update any from the previous week.
I just want to add on a little bit to that. And Crystal, you'll be able to say it better than I can with the details. But for those of you listening who are just concerned about, hey, I want to know what my child's status is more often than I know now. A student can access our testing at their school on a purely voluntary basis. They don't need to be on any special list of that we need a test from them. They can voluntarily get tested. There are 2 opportunities at each campus each week to voluntarily test. Crystal, you want to say more about that?
Yeah, so as supplies last, it is open to everyone. So there are some groups, and those are very limited, who have to, because of needing to meet some requirements, they have to test. And so they're often part of that, but it's not limited only to certain people. So anyone who's able to attend school can take part in that testing. I saw some questions saying schools, your student's school might not have testing 2 days a week. All 5 comprehensive high schools have testing 2 days a week. So Branham, Del Mar, Lee, Prospect, and Westmont all have testing 2 days a week. One of the days it's in the morning, and one of the days it's in the afternoon. So that might be why you might not know about the additional time because it is in the morning. So it starts before school and goes through some of the student breaks and lunchtime that testing is available. So I know that we have our testing schedule up on our CUHSD website that shows each school site and when the testing is offered. Our smaller schools like Boynton and Camden do have it only 1 day a week because we're able to get to everybody who's interested in the testing in just that one time.
On that testing, Crystal, there was a question earlier about, my student goes to Boynton. Can they go to Del Mar during their Del Mar's testing time and take a test there?
Unfortunately, no. We have such staff that are accessing results, a very limited number of staff, and we need to keep that just to the students who are enrolled at that staff's school. And so we want to make sure to control everybody's confidential information appropriately and not mix communities of students, unnecessarily throughout the weeks. And so we ask you to stick to testing at your school site only.
All right. With that, I did want to share a little bit about how to get to the web pages that we've been talking about. So I'm just going to do a quick demonstration of how to get there. So here I have the CUHSD website. Once you're here at our landing page, you can go under resources, and under COVID-19 information, you'll see all the latest information that we've been talking about tonight, along with important links to different guidance. A lot of you have been asking about where to sign up your student for testing. Under the COVID-19 resources page, here is the link to the Binax Now rapid antigen testing. You fill that out. Underneath, you'll see the schedule that we are in the different schools throughout the district. So you can refer to that for signing up your student to get tested on a bi-weekly basis or 2 times a week, and see when the testing happens at your school site. Go ahead and stop sharing. We are coming up on time, and I really want to just thank everyone for coming tonight and being part of this Q&A session. We will be posting this video and information on that same website link that I shared with you tonight, or that I just shared in that demonstration. So please refer to that for the most updated information. Yeah, with that.
If I can just say in closing, Sergio, as she was sharing a piece of information, Crystal talked about, was that last night? Was it days are blurring? But there is a difference, I think, about where we are in the pandemic now. It's true that we didn't know a lot. Changes happened very frequently during the pandemic. And then we entered a space where it seemed like we were sort of getting ahead of it, and we went for a long period of time where the guidance has stayed the same. And now it feels like we're re-entering a period where guidance is changing, potentially changing more frequently. So there is a difference in how often guidance is changing. So the changing guidance that Crystal was referring to was in fact one that was from last night, the latest changing guidance, and it could continue to change. So I just want to let you know that, we did more of these kinds of events earlier in the pandemic. And if things change, then, we'll keep on doing this, we'll bring them back. We will adjust to whatever we have to do just to keep folks informed as things change. And I'll just also share the personal perspective. I am the father of a public school student. I know that Meredyth, Crystal, Herman, they all have at least one student in the public schools. I had my first experience right after the winter break. Last week, my son from his elementary school got the notice of being in close contact. And so I know what that feels like. It's, you wonder, is he going to be okay? What's the right thing to do? So we are trying but I believe in keeping the schools open very strongly. I'm sending him. I sent him then. I'm sending him now. I'm going to keep on sending him. I think that's the right thing overall for him. I know that's not true necessarily for all families. And there are those families where they need to be more cautious, and I appreciate that. But I just wanted to share that that perspective that we're not just trying to carry out the laws of the dictates of the state or the county health department, but we are trying to approach it. How would we want our own kids to their experience to be like?
Well, once again, thank you all for joining us. I'm closing out the session now, but these recordings and the information will be posted on our website. Please visit it for more information. Thank you and have a good night.